Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is session 17. And in these two sessions, as you can tell from what's on the PowerPoint, in session 17, we're going to be looking at something we haven't talked about, the end of the world. And then in session 18, we're going to be looking at the power of darkness. And so those are the main subject headings for the things that we're going to be doing today. So to get ourselves started, let's just look at this verse that we've been looking at. And Romans 13:12, the night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and let us put on the armor of light. We know what that phrase means. We realize that that phrase is talking about everything that was going on leading up to this dispensation of grace and the things that will be taking place once this dispensation of grace has come to a close. And that's what those phrases, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, that's the two parts that those are referring to. And I talked to you here in the recent sessions about the issue of the climactic stage. And I don't know if it's on that timeline, but the climactic stage, let me just look at this. It is. If you look at that chart, you've got kind of a gray block that starts down here underneath the earthly ministry of the Lord. And if you move past the dispensation of grace, you'll see that that climactic stage in Israel's program is going to resume. And so that climactic stage consists of the fourth and the fifth parts of the fifth course of punishment, or the fourth and fifth installments. I've called them a number of things. And just to make sure that we don't confuse those, let's put them on our timeline. You have some red circles on there, and you'll be filling some things in. Now, my circles don't match yours exactly. Yours are up and down for the space available. And I couldn't just put them all in a row, so I had to kind of drop them down and indent them a little bit. But just so we see it, let's go through them, and then we'll put them on the timeline just so you know. The first one, course 1, and here it is right here. Just put that 1 up there, and I've got in the legend on your timeline what that number 1 corresponds to. And you can see that number 1 is the 450 years under the judges. That's the length of time so the first course of punishment is in the book of Judges. It was predicted back in Leviticus 26, and now the book of Judges actually records how that goes along. Number 2, now by the way, this isn't a number 2, and it's not on your timeline. I'm just putting it in here because, you know, when we studied this, we got it. There was almost 100 years of an interlude of mercy. That's the reigns of David and Solomon. I realize those are 40 years apiece, but there was some time leading up to that. And what God did in that interlude is He actually suspended the punishments and allowed Israel to rise to a place of power and prominence in the world that they had never seen and have never yet enjoyed like they did then. It was in that interlude that not only did Israel control more land area than at any other time in their history, and they had defeated their enemies, and they became a spectacle to the world. Remember, it was the Queen of Sheba that came, and she looked at all the things that were happening in Israel, and she said, I heard these wonderful things and how marvelous it was. I didn't believe it. I had to come to myself. But truthfully, the half wasn't even told about what's going on here. And it was, and by the way, that's what God was doing in that interlude, but when He rolled back the punishments of that first course of punishment, is He was showing them, He was giving them a little. Now she thought it was great. She thought it was marvelous. God said, I'm giving you a foretaste of what it's going to be like in the kingdom. If you guys want to know what I want for you, let me just give you a sample. And oh my goodness, and I just, when you look at that, you think, how would anyone in their right mind, how would any Hebrew person in their right mind not look at that and go, if that's what God wants for us, then we ought to get on board with that. And so He gave them that interlude of mercy. But of course, when Solomon dies, because God promised that He wasn't going to reinstitute those courses of punishment until after the death of Solomon. And so then you have the second course coming in, so you can just stick it in you'll drop down below to put in number 2, because it's actually in that order. I didn't have room to do that on your timeline. But number 2 is the ministry of Elijah takes place. There's something else there, the divided kingdom. And remember, after Solomon, the kingdom divides, and then you have the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And so that was part of the predicted course of punishment back there in Leviticus 26. Course 3 happens under the ministry of Elisha. Now you're going to go back up top. I'm dropping down on my timeline, but just the next one that's going to be in the sequential order there. That is going to happen with the ministry of Elisha. Not going to take the time to talk about the events that are happening in these courses of punishment. We're just identifying them. Number 4, you know what? I don't know why I have divided kingdom down there. I thought that I had plugged that into the wrong spot. It should just be evil kings is what that should be.
No, you just have evil kings, Israel under siege.
Okay, I got it right on your timeline. I just didn't get it right on the PowerPoint. Israel is under siege in that fourth. In fact, they're not able to travel from city to city. They're holed up within the land, and the enemies from around them have come in and laid siege to them. And then you get to the 5th and final course of punishment. And that is, and I'm going to do it this way, 5-1. Because you're going to find that 5th course is divided into 5 parts. And that's what I didn't want you to get confused. When I say that a climactic stage is the 4th and the 5th installments of the 5th course of punishment, I didn't want you to get those confused with these back here. I wanted you to see that what it was. We'll just go through and you'll see it. So the first installment is the 70 years captivity under Babylon. Prior to that, the northern kingdom has already been carried away captive by the Assyrians. Okay, course 5, installment number 2 is the 49 years under the Medes and the Persians. So 5-2. In that next circle on your chart. By the way, there's more than the 49 years there, but those 49 years have to do with some particular punishments when they go back. They're released, they're allowed to go back into the land, and they're trying to rebuild the wall in troublous times. And Daniel is the one, by the way, that gives us a lot of the detail of how this 5th course is divided up. And so then you have course 5, installment 3, and that is the 5-3. That is the 400 years of silence. Malachi is already finished. You have 3 prophets that actually are contemporaries that are winding up. Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi are the last 3. And when they finish up there, and you've heard in the prophets already that there's going to be a time of silence for the Lord. And actually, I'm just labeling it there, but you realize that this 3rd one actually runs all the way over. Okay? But I'm not doing time elements on any of these. That's 400 years. This is 450 years. We're just looking at it like that. And then you have course 5, the 4th installment, and that's roughly 34 years. So right here, now look, that's going to run actually from here through the extension of mercy. So I think I put that in on your chart for you, didn't I? Yeah, because I just wanted you to see that it's this whole area right here is actually that fourth installment or that fourth part of the fifth course of punishment. And now you've got the last one, which is the fifth course, the fifth installment, and that is right over here, 5-5. Now, is everybody with me? Does everybody see what we've done there? Okay, so what you have is this and this, that, those two are what compose the climactic stage in Israel's program. And God does deal with that as a final closing stage. And that's not a lot of years. Yeah, Karen?
It's like 5-5 is the day of wrath, even though it's going to be the 70 weeks.
It is. 5-5 is the day of wrath. And actually, yeah, 5-5 is the day of wrath. And it is the Daniel's 70th week. Yeah, it's a 7-year period. Yes. Okay. Any other questions about this part? All right, so what I'm saying to you, and the only reason I'm clarifying is because when I tell you that the climactic stage is the fourth and fifth installments of the fifth course, I didn't want in your mind for you to come back over here and do the fourth and the fifth course. Okay, everybody see what we're doing? Any questions? Okay, all right. So, now we marked that climactic stage as beginning. And I don't know if I have John on your timeline, do I?
JTB.
I did. Okay, JTB. All right, there you. That's right. Okay, so John Thomas Baptist. No, okay. He's the one that actually starts the climactic stage, and as you see on your timeline, that's when from that point that is when the kingdom begins to be preached as being at hand. And if that kingdom is at hand, then this climactic stage is underway, because the kingdom will be the next thing. And of course, what God is going to do, and I have 3 things that are listed in your notes. I started to stick them on your timeline, but I didn't want to clutter it up too much because we still have a lot of things to add to this timeline. But what we're going to see is that fifth installment, that final one out there, 5-5, that is the Lord's Day of Wrath. And here's what's going to happen. Out here, now just I'll put it here. But what's going to happen in 5-5 is God is going to destroy apostate Israel. That's the first thing that's going to happen. And and you've got to see that as a separate thing that's going to take place. The next thing that's going to happen is He is going to avenge His cause with Israel among the Gentiles. Now you knew there were 2 parts to this. There was the nation, and then there was the world at large. And so, in that day of wrath, He is going to destroy apostate Israel, avenge His cause with Israel among the Gentile nations. I said the Gentiles, but it's the Gentile nations of the world, and they're going to be judged. The next thing He's going to do is destroy Satan's plan of evil. Now, we've talked about his policy of evil a lot, or his policies of evil. But Satan has a plan of evil. And that thing is given to you back over there in Isaiah chapter 14. It's a 5-step plan that culminates in Satan becoming the possessor of heaven and earth. In other words, he wants to be like the Most High. The Most High is the possessor of heaven and earth. He wants to do that. And so he has a plan. And we're going to look at that plan in a little more detail in just a moment. But what else is going to happen out here is that God is going to destroy the plan of evil. And that's an important thing to understand. Because it's not enough just to put down His enemies. But that original plan is going to have to be dealt with. Okay, and then the last thing that's going to happen there is, and of course this is really when that's over, but the next thing is, He's going to set up His kingdom on the earth. So those are the things, the first three are the things that are taking place out here in that day of wrath, in the fifth installment of the fifth course. Those are the things happening. Now, I think you knew most of that, but I just need you to start thinking about it that way. All right, now I'm looking at faces that are, maybe I just need to say it one more time just to make sure that we're all understanding what we're doing here. When you get, the climactic stage starts here, it got interrupted by the dispensation of grace. Once the program of Israel resumes, then what's going to happen in that day of wrath is God is going to deal with the apostate members of the nation. He's going to deal with the Gentile nations in the world at large. He is going to destroy the satanic plan of evil, and He is going to set up His kingdom. Now that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That all of that has to happen just that way. Okay. Now, by the way, I'm not going over this just to kind of review things with you, but I'm actually setting you up because because I told you at the start, one of the main focuses of this lesson was going to be to look at that phrase, the end of the world. And you've seen that as you've read through the gospel accounts. You may have read that in several different places. And so when God began, now look at this. When He began the climactic stage, I sure wish I had that up here. I don't have it, but I do have it on yours, right? I have that bar across there. When He began that climactic stage, He was beginning the process to bring about the end of the world. That's what the climactic stage is going to result in. Yes, it's going to do all of these things, but it's going to bring, well, let's just add it in there. Bring about the end of the world. I don't know, am I too low here, Mark? Can you see that? Okay. Can y'all see that?
So that's where the reconciliation of the heavens and the earth?
The reconciliation of the heavens and the earth won't be until after the 1,000-year kingdom. So now that I've introduced this phrase to you, the end of the world, we need to talk about what that is. And so so on your chart, you should have a box in red or pink or something up here toward the top somewhere. Do you see that? There's a couple of things I would like for you to write in up there. Don't write over the top of the dispensation of grace yet, because I have something else for us to put in that box. But what I'd like for you to do is start it over here and label it end of the world. I'm going to show you some verses that actually talk about when did the process to bring about the end of the world begin. Now, you realize that what you're getting here is information that's going to allow you to not just tag it on a timeline, but it's going to allow you to see what God's doing, what He's working toward at this particular time. And so, when we look at this, in fact, I'll just take you over to Hebrews, and I'm going to make a statement. I'm going to read. Now, you know Hebrews is written to whom? Yeah, it's written to the Jewish remnant. And that book, Hebrews, pertains to them especially once their program has resumed. In other words, the folks back in time past didn't have the benefit of the book of Hebrews. Okay? So, Hebrews is written, I don't even know if I ought to talk about that issue or not, but when the books start to get written, you know, here's Christ and He dies on the cross, you have the year extension of mercy, Paul gets saved on the Damascus Road. Let me tell you something. Paul is the last writer, by his own admission, he is the last writer of the books of the New Testament. There is a transition in the book of Acts. From the time that Saul of Tarsus gets saved to Acts 15, actually we could say Acts 28, because after Acts 28, the transition period is done away with. And that's why I've told you over and over again, Acts is the book that is written to Israel to tell them about their fall and diminishing. And that's exactly the terminology that Paul uses in Romans 9, 10, and 11. And so, during that time where you have Paul giving people the gospel of grace, you also have members of the believing remnant still alive. Right? They're still alive during that time. So you've actually got now the body of Christ being formed, but you still have members of the remnant still alive and on the earth. So you've kind of got two programs working simultaneous there. And what God is doing is He is closing out one and giving rise to the other. And so it's during that time that these books get written. And Paul writes some of his epistles there, but by his own admission, he says that it was given to him, that God gave him the responsibility to finish the canon of Scripture, the books of the New Testament, or as he just says, the Scriptures. So he's the last one, and I know way back there, I told you, way back there, even before I came here, I did a conference there and I talked about the book of Revelation being written in 96 AD. And that was the way I understood that. But since that time, I've come to understand for quite a while now that John did not write that book in 96 AD. He wrote that book back during the transition time at the beginning of this dispensation of grace when the members of the remnant were still living and on this earth. And by the time Paul writes his last book, 2 Timothy, by the time Paul writes that book, every other book has been written. Now, the only reason that I'm telling you that is because we're about to read something in the book of Hebrews that was written back there during that transition time, or certainly before Paul finished writing. So look with me in Hebrews 9:26. For then must he often have suffered. He was talking about, well, let's just read it. For then must he often have suffered since the foundation of the world. But now, once, in the end of the world hath he appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. Who's he talking about? Yes, he's talking about Jesus Christ. He appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. The first part of that phrase, for then must he often have suffered as the fountain, he was saying, if Christ wasn't any different than the blood of bulls and goats, what did they have to do with them every year that he keeps sacrificing them? He said, if what he was doing isn't any better than that, he would have had to kept suffering since the foundation. He would have just had to keep going. But now, it says, but now, once. See, it's not a repeated thing. Once. When does he say that once took place? In the end of the world. So if you're now, where on our timeline did Christ deal with sin? At the cross, the Redeemer mandate, right? So guess what? This is considered part of the end of the world. You see, that's the start of the process. He didn't say the world ended there, but you're going to see some other verses that talk about what else is included in the end of the world.
But now, puts that into the dispensation of Christ.
Well, but dispensationally though, he is writing to the believing remnant. It's prophetic scriptures for the Hebrew remnant. So he says, but now once in the end of the world hath he appeared to put away sin. So see, if that's getting written back over here, you're still in Israel's, you still have a remnant there. Okay, so all I'm after here is to show you that this end of the world starts with this fourth installment of the fifth course of punishment. Now let me take you to another one, Mark chapter 13, and we're going to see the end of the world. And here we go. Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. Now remember, and I chose this because remember, we did the work on the wheat and the tares. How the tares come up, it looks like wheat, it's not. All right? So he says, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. Remember back there when we talked about, they said, well, where did these tares come from? He said, an enemy hath sowed them. That's as far as we read the other day. Now I'm taking you a little further as he explains this parable, and you understand who that is now. That enemy is the devil. And what did he do? He sowed tares among the wheat. And we made a parallel issue that just like there are sons and daughters that are trying to get their education, what will happen in the dispensation of grace is that the enemy, the devil, will sow counterfeits in our midst to do the same thing he was doing with Israel. It's one of those parallel issues. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world. Now there's that phrase, and the reapers are the angels. And therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity. He's going to gather them out of where? Out of his kingdom. So you know what you have? You have the end of the world back here where Christ is, and that process is continuing along all the way to the kingdom. So that thing, that's why I said what God is doing in the climactic stage is He is bringing about the end of the world. And it starts with Christ functioning as the Redeemer, and it's going to end out here with the angels pulling the tares out from among the wheat, pulling them out of the kingdom. Okay, now Karen?
I can see why people become confused too, because if God's turned his back on Israel to allow dispensation of grace with no Jew, no Gentile, or even Stephen.
Right.
People get confused because there's no direction to, they always fall back on the Ten Commandments. That's the best they've got right now.
Right.
Because they've never heard this message.
That's right. Yeah, right, and they do. They default back to the Israel program.
That's all they know.
That's all they know. It's all they've been
So
taught.
they're terrified. They just know the day of wrath is coming.
Can you imagine where we would be if we had been brought up in this doctrine?
Man, we'd be wise.
This would be incredibly different for us. But at least we're where we are.
For those that hang on to some kind of a foundation are just hanging on, and the rest of the world is saying, it didn't work back then, why is it going to work today?
Well, I can understand that. Okay, now so here's what we have. We have the fourth installment of the fifth course of punishment here, the fifth and final installment of the fifth course here. Both of those are working together to bring about the end of the world. So the question that we have to answer is, well, wait a minute. Now, if the climactic stage of Israel's program got interrupted by us, then did the end of the world also get interrupted by us? And the answer is no. This is this is why it takes so long to figure it out. This is why I get it wrong 6 times before I get something right. Because you're looking at the program got interrupted, right? And therefore the climactic stage of Israel's program got interrupted. So the natural thing to think, and if you thought that, you thought what I thought at the beginning, that the end of the world it also got interrupted. But Paul comes along and says it didn't. The end of the world. And that is so important to get that. And I'll show you why. So let's take a look at it in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 11. Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples. And by the way, all those things he's referring to are things that happened to Israel in their program. He says, now all these things that happened unto them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition. In other words, for Israel, it was an ensample. It was something they were supposed to learn by. And it was written also for our admonition, us in this dispensation of grace. Look, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So Paul says to the church at Corinth, in the dispensation of grace, he says, those things that you saw for them, yes, it was to teach them something, but it was also for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And that's that little tweak of the word, and that's what I want you to put above the dispensation of grace. Ends of the world. Because it's not the end of the world, it's ends, plural. Now that will make you scratch your head. Why in the world is he now using ends, plural? And you have to understand the way that Paul is using this terminology. Now, you know what I started to do? I actually started to take you back over to 1 Corinthians and start going through the details of this chapter so I could prove to you what I'm about to tell you. But we're going to be in Corinthians. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to tell it to you. And if you want to study it, you can go over there and look at it. And we're going to get there in the not too distant future. And so if you're aware of what Paul has already written in the book of 1 Corinthians, just to give you a hint, in chapter 4. If you know the things that are already written over there, then you'll understand that when Paul talks about the ends of the world, he is talking about the end of the world. By the way, when the Jews come, I didn't give you the scripture, but in Matthew 24, when Jesus is sitting up on Mount Olivet, it says his disciples came to him and told him, because it said, well, just turn over there. We'll just read it. Matthew 24. I can quote it, but I mean, all this is going to just require explaining. If we read it, we'll see it. Because they came to show him the buildings of the temple, and he makes a statement about one stone not being left upon another, and then they're going to ask this question about the ends of the world. So Matthew 24, verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him for to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? What are they talking about when they say the end of the world? Oh no. What are they talking about? The end of the world. Okay, well, let's talk. Well, they are. The ends of the world started with the crucifixion. It's going to go all the way to the kingdom. But what world is coming to an end?
The world that's not raised by Jesus Christ, right? The evil world.
Okay, the evil world, is that what you're saying? The world that's not ruled over by Jesus Christ? Karen is saying the evil world? Yes. The world of the ungodly is coming to an end. There's more than that. When the flood came, now, look, I showed you this 3 weeks ago. And I know you probably scratching your head and going, why are we looking at this? It's because we were coming here. Do you remember when the flood came? Do I even have that on my timeline? You've got it on yours, right? Okay. When the flood came, it was to destroy the world of the ungodly, right? But it not only things changed on the... Remember, because I told you after the flood, things were different. That's why they called that the old world. Remember Peter talked about. He said, but the heavens and the earth which are now. Wait a minute. So with the flood, things not only changed on the earth, they also changed where? In the heavens. But when you're part... Now that's back here before there was even an Israel. Now Peter, yes, is talking about it, but he's describing what happened prior to the flood. There was no Israel prior to the flood. That doesn't start until Abraham, right? So when you come through Israel's program, God is utilizing Israel to do what? They're His tool to repossess the earth to Him. They are the means by which He will use to repossess the earth. But there's more than the earth. What else is there? Huh? Yeah, the heavenly places. Does Israel know anything about repossessing the heavenly places? No, they don't. That doesn't get revealed until Paul. So, for them, when they say the end of the world, they're talking about this world of the ungodly. That's going to come to an end. But when we talk about the ends of the world, because even that world, back before there was an Israel, that judgment impacted the heavens and the earth. When you get to Israel's program, they're just thinking about the earth. They're going to, you know what? They're going to be in a kingdom that's set up where? On the earth. And David is going to sit on a throne over Israel, which is on the earth. And the Lord is going to be King of Kings on the earth. All of that's happening on the earth. But because of who we are in the dispensation of grace, because we are members of the body of Christ who are going to get a glorified body that allows us to be up in those heavenly places, this not only is working toward the end of the world of the ungodly, but it's ends plural, because there's also going to be another end. Yes, of the ungodliness in the heavens. Well, because he's looking at this whole thing as a single entity. Yes, it's all an entity. But it's ends because you know what? This is not going to happen at the thing in the heavenly places doesn't happen at the exact same time the thing is happening on the earth. But see, we know. Do we know what's happening on the earth? We have Israel scriptures, we know. But we also know what's happening in the heavenly places. So here's what Paul says to us, upon whom the ends of the world have come. So guess what? And we're gonna chart all this out. The program interrupted, resumed. The climactic stage of that program interrupted, resumed. The fifth course of punishment interrupted, resumed. The end of the world continues. God is, and you know what that tells you? God just wasn't doing things in Israel's program to bring about an end to the world of the ungodly. He is doing something in this program to bring about the ends of the world of the ungodly. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? Because once you understand what that world is that's coming to an end, you realize we have a part in that too. This is really going to be an amazing thing. And so so let me give you this. I know the clock went off. I forgot about it. Gosh, how long would I have gone waiting for the buzzer again? When y'all left, I guess I'd have got the hint. Okay. So here, let me give you this, and then we'll stop for the break. This is what is not continuing to happen in the dispensation of grace. This is what is not happening. We are not in God's program with Israel. So that program is not happening today. Everybody gets that, don't you? Everybody gets that. Here's the second one. We are not part of God's climactic stage. That is a description of what's happening in His program with Israel. So, both of those have been interrupted. Here's what is happening. We are part of the ends of the world. When I say we're part of, I'm saying the night is still going on in this dispensation of grace. The night did not get interrupted. When I say we're part of the night, I don't mean to say we're complicit with it. I mean, it's going on. It continues on. Satan is continuing his works of darkness in this dispensation of grace. We know that because Paul tells us we're going to cast those off. Satan's wicked workers of iniquity are present today. Paul's going to name some of them by name in his day. And then we're still to have our Father's attitude toward the world. Just like Israel's remnant did, so will we. Those things are still working today. But it's important to understand there's some aspects that got interrupted. There's others that go right on. Now, I know you're hearing this for the first time now, but the more you look at this and the more you get this in your mind, you know what that's going to cause you to do? You're going to be able to look and you're going to go, oh, I see exactly what God's doing here. In other words, by allowing the night to continue and the works of darkness to continue, and because we are in the ends of the world as part of that process, you will look at that and you'll go, now I understand exactly what God is doing. This is all part of what we're about to just bring to a close. Now, this is not the place that I thought that we were going to shut this down. So I have a lot of ground to cover in the next session. So we'll take a break here and then we'll come back and pick it up.